Welcome to the Liberation Lab podcast, insights and interviews for the disruptive educator. I'm excited to have my guest. I want to let him introduce himself. Why don't you tell the people who you are, what you do, and why you do it?
My name is Donovan Taylor Hall. I am a youth educator and youth speaker. My work revolves around helping kids build good relationships with themselves, specifically around how they treat themselves and how that impacts how they view themselves. Why I do what I do is that's such a huge question. I don't
Yeah.
know. I just think that we're in desperate need of an expansion on what kids are being taught and how that connects back to them. And I see such a disconnect in
Mm,
education with identity formation, which is something that all kids need support in. And so positive youth development is a huge part of my life. It's a big part of my background. And taking positive youth development and bringing it into schools and transforming it into curriculum has been something I've been really passionate about. But now I'm speaking and doing it in 6 different areas to just reach as many kids as I can. But that's my ultimate goal.
awesome. Uh, sounds busy, but rewarding all at the same time.
Yeah, I love to call myself lazy. And we were talking about this earlier. It's
Yeah.
so unfair. But I just grew up having very high expectations of myself and trying to find safety and being good. And so having to
Yeah.
do all of this work on my own, especially after my work took off and I got a lot of positive attention for it, it's been tough to navigate realistic and kind and compassionate expectations for myself and make space for celebrating growth, which is like all the things I do with kids. But trying to
Yeah.
do it for myself is a little bit tougher.
It's so interesting to hear you say that. And thank you for sharing that. For me, as you were talking, I couldn't help but hear or echoes of myself, if that makes sense. Like
Mhm.
I have been um, very much so high performing, but if I'm not careful, it's because I'm running from something rather than existing. You know
You
what I
don't want
mean?
to. You don't want to open that can with me. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And for me, as a young person, and even when I work with kids, especially high achieving kids, it's it feels like it's often grounded in this is why I'm valued, and this is how I find safety. And so it's like if I'm not doing 150%, then I'm not going to be valued. And if I'm not valued, then I'm not safe. And I don't know if
Yeah.
people are cognitively or consciously thinking about it that way. But for me, that's what it was like,
Yeah.
you be good. And when you're struggling and when you're not good, don't let people see that. And even though I have so much compassion and love and support in my life, that voice has been such a huge one in my life for so long that it's taken a lot of work to really challenge it in a compassionate and understanding way.
Yeah. So on the heels of that, let's travel back through time to little Donovan going
Donnie.
and traversing school. Um, Talk to me about your K to 12 experience, and I guess on the heels of that, as you look back to the person that you were, like from your vantage point now, what advice would you have given yourself?
So K through 12, I don't know. I just felt so disconnected from my learning experience. I just feel
Mm,
like there was not, I can't pinpoint many moments in my education where I really felt like I was being seen or felt like I found myself. I grew up in a predominantly white area at the time, even though my school was very mixed. The area I grew up in did not look like me, and I always felt and was told that I had to do more and had to kind of be more. Um, I think one of the biggest things I've never really talked about, but it's really relevant in my life right now, is that when I thought about my grades, I would always be like, I had all A's and one B, and the B was math. And I just hyper focused on that. When in reality, all A's and a B is good,
yeah.
right? That didn't last all the way until high school. I started to get a little wild in high school and it fell off a little bit. But I
Yeah.
remember I hyper focused on getting a B and not being good enough. And
Yeah.
no one in my life was really giving me a hard time about it except for myself.
Mm,
Um, and so for me, school um, just didn't really help me understand myself. And if anything, it kind of created a disconnect from myself because I was just really hard on myself, and I really struggled to ask for support when I needed it. And that led into some, really dangerous and problematic behaviors as a young person. But I think, if I had to give myself any advice, it would just be get help. That would be it.
Mm,
It would be get and allow help. And I
yeah.
was really good at hiding. Like that was a thing I did. I hid it a lot. My friends knew I was a little bit of a mess, especially in high school. But my whole middle school experience, I was really, really depressed. And at the same time, I started to become more social. Then suddenly, that's when I started to have friends, and I realized I was a little bit of like a charmer, and I could have community around me, and I would go home and just be really sad, and I would
Mm,
hide it from my friends, and I would hide it from my family. And it didn't really start to, I don't think people started to realize it until I started to, use substances and stuff when I got older, and the mask came down a little bit. Um,
mm,
I just wish I would have, I don't know. It's just tough. It's hard to tell little me to get help because how would I have?
right.
That's the tough part. I was just thinking about self care today. This sounds like a tangent, but it's connected. I was thinking
Absolutely.
about self care and the ways that we're like, oh, go to therapy, or get a massage, and it's like, what if you don't have access to those resources? And as young people, especially growing up as like a black boy, I didn't feel like there were spaces or opportunities for me to be held and seen. And so when I had experiences like that in college, I felt like a kid. Like I would
Mm,
have these huge, like just outpours of emotion and
yeah.
struggle and suffering kind of come out in these spaces because it was the first time. So I don't look back and say, get help, like I messed up and I should have been doing better. I almost kind of want to go back in time and ask the people in my life to help me. I don't
Yeah.
really, if I could say anything to little Donnie, it's I love you and I see you and I'm sorry that you're sad. But I don't think that a lot of that responsibility fell on me, and it's tough. It's tough to kind of acknowledge that.
I I really want to jump in here because what you're saying is almost like I'm so in sync with what you're saying because there are many educators who will listen to this and in their mind, maybe they can't wrap their brain around individuals like you and myself who couldn't go, who couldn't, right? Like it's one thing to say this is a safe space and to
Mm-hmm.
call it that.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite another to labor, to reflect, and to refine to make it a safe space, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think about it like it's it's one thing to go to the doctor's appointment and get the checkup. It's quite another to be safe enough to say this is where it hurts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and much like yourself, I was in situations where you know turmoil at home. Well, for me, turmoil at home, and it kind of was masked in how well I performed. Uh, it was masked in me participating in athletics. It was masked in me being the nice guy. And because it was an escape, I never really dealt with anything. It was almost like
Mm-hmm.
this performance in school was my drug of choice. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah, yeah. I don't think I've told this on a podcast, but when I was in my senior year, we did superlatives, like the most likely to, and I got most likely to brighten your day. And I went on stage, and I was wearing a diaper because I was dressed up as Tommy from Rugrats, which is
Tommy
classic.
Pickles.
Yeah, Tommy Pickles. And I left to go to the bathroom afterwards, and I sobbed in the bathroom.
Wow.
And I just thought, how can people see me this way? Like when I just feel so unhappy, and it was just such a huge disconnect. And I
Yeah.
think I was very emotional as a kid, and I was very tough on myself being a boy. Also, knowing that I was queer and being called out for that, especially from the few black communities that I was a part of, like to toughen
Yeah.
up. The first time I got a haircut, I was called a fruitcake when I was like 10, and I cried in the barber shop. And And I used to just be so mean to myself about it. It was like, why are you crying? Like I couldn't hold it in. I would cry in the middle of school. Like if
Yeah.
there was something that happened, I would cry and people would see it. And as an adult, recently, well, about 7 years ago, I did a youth development training, and it talked about ACEs, adverse
Yeah.
childhood experiences, and it talked about like the death of a parent being a huge one and the trauma that that can cause. And I cried in that meeting because it was like, yo, how could I have been so mean to myself when I lost my dad when I was 6?
Mm,
Right? Like by the time I was out of high school, I had been to maybe 5 funerals in my life, of people that I loved, of men that I loved.
yeah.
And but when I was a kid, I didn't know how to process that. And it's tough. I wanted to, when I first started working with kids, I really wanted kids to do personal development and be like, be your best you. And then when I realized was that a lot of the gold in my work came from providing space for them to be who they are and to be seen how they are and to be held in whatever they need in that moment. And so much of my work has shifted from, very like what, I was going to say something else, very like personal development, pull
Yeah.
yourself up, right? Like
Yeah.
motivation, you are the person that leads your life and stuff. To take care of yourself and be good to yourself and be kind to yourself, because how you treat yourself determines how you show up in the world. And
Absolutely.
as my relationship with myself as I got older and I got meaner and I was harsher towards myself, and some of it started to spill out into the people around me, but mainly just
Mm,
being really hard on myself. I didn't I didn't give myself any compassion or space because I suddenly knew, that this is how I was showing up, and you need to do better and you need to be better and don't let people see you be weak. And it makes me sad to think that that's how I felt about myself as a young person, when in reality I had every reason in the world to be sad and to be held in that sadness. And maybe if I had some more space and some more support around the grief and the struggle that I had, maybe it wouldn't have felt so out of control. Maybe I would have felt more in control of who I was, and more in control of my emotions and what I do with
yeah.
them.
You in bold letters as you look at your site, and we'll make sure we link all your stuff in the show notes, but it's a quote that obviously stands out, and it's like kids who feel better do better.
Yeah.
I think about this and I could hear what I'm going to name the cynical educator say. You're asking for me to do something else.
Mm-hmm.
I got hired as a teacher. My job is to transmit this information from one party to the next. That is what I get paid to do. And here you are asking me again, on the heels of all the things we talk about, build relationships, make connections. And it just feels like I'm being asked to do so much.
Yeah.
Um, from that space, I would like to launch into a conversation about what it really means to that kids feel better, do better. What would
Yeah.
you say to that educator? Go ahead.
I get it. First of all, I understand.
Yeah.
I think I've been really trying to lift up positive youth development work. That's how I got started. It was in after school programs. It was in places like the YMCA, Boys and Girls Club, summer camps. I'm about to go to summer camps for a whole month starting tomorrow, um, because that was a place where the motivation around working with kids was different and more kind of set, and we want to help you grow and we want to help you feel positive. And so much of what I learned is what I took into teaching. And so
Mm,
I got a lot of pushback from teachers. Even when the Today Show came to my school, I had teachers talking trash about me to the kids, even though
mm,
I know kids were coming up and telling me, and I was like, everyone at the school knew that this was this dream of mine that I'd had since the day I came to that school.
yeah.
I was like, I don't want to be an educator forever because I don't know how to balance data and balance expectations that are put on teachers with the work that it sometimes feels it feels
Yeah.
difficult to do together. But and teaching in a school for 3 years, I found that it was possible to focus on relationship building and connection building. And when I started to think about behaviors that are really disruptive, what I've seen and what I've heard about, especially after the pandemic, is it sounds like a lot. It sounds like a lot to deal with,
Yeah.
and especially when it comes to the disrespect. And I think back to an experience I had, and I'll share it with you if you're open.
Please.
I had at one of the schools I taught at, we had a teacher who came in and had very different opinions about structure and agreements, like saying the kids giving kids rules is dictatorship and blah blah blah. And I heard her and I was like, look, like I hear you, but also like structure is healthy and it's important. And when there's structure that's grounded in care and love, from my perspective, it creates safety, and safety lets kids be kids. And she pushed back on it, and eventually it was just chaos in that classroom. Like things were just being destroyed. She was getting into fights with the kids. They were getting into fights with her. She was disrespecting them. They were disrespecting her. They were destroying the space. And eventually she left the school. And I had been there with this group. They were eighth graders, and I'd had them in seventh grade. And I was in a position where I was teaching my own curriculum with a co-teacher, and eventually my boss basically kind of just begged me to take that position over. And it was like a subject that I was like, bro, I have no idea. Like art gives me anxiety. I don't even. And he was like, look, he said to me, it doesn't really even matter what you teach. They just need you in that space. Like they need a space because it feels so bad for so many of the kids.
Mm.
Before she quit, we had like 10 kids do like a walkout of her classroom, like a staged, we won't be in this class with this teacher. So it was a lot of really
Wow.
negative feelings. And when we came back to that space, the first thing that I did with them is that we just had a circle and we just shared about the damage and harm that they had felt. And the first day, that's what we focused on. And the second day, we came back and we went around the circle the whole class period. It took it up. Kids were open and honest. I do think that's because I'd already built a lot of relationships with these kids, and so they knew
Yeah.
me and they knew that this is the place where they could be safe to talk about this, and they weren't going to be punished or judged.
Yep.
And then they started to lean deeper into harm in general, and they started to focus on harm that they had caused to her. They focused on harm that they caused to each other, and they focused on harm that they had caused to the space. And we spent about 2 to 3 days per class just talking about this. And I could see such a relief in the kids from owning, from first of all being heard and not having it shifted, but just like saying we felt harmed and we didn't feel good about being in this class. And then we just redesigned. We cleaned the entire room. I had the
Mm.
kids design. It was my first art project. I had them design a room layout. They could vote on it. Like, what do you want to have in this space to help you feel better? And we spent about 2 weeks thinking about agreements, thinking about what behaviors help create safety. And after that, it was just great. I mean, we didn't
Mm.
have any discipline issues in that class for 5 months because then we went on break because of pandemic. And I just thought about how that they were being seen and how they were being treated because of that class was deeply affecting how they were showing up. And a lot of them were really quick to say, we caused harm and I feel bad about this and we were disrespectful and blah, blah, blah. And helping them kind of shift to like, okay, well, what does respect look like to you? I just think about that experience because it was such a powerful moment in helping the kids shift how they felt about themselves and what had happened in that space, and then to see them take leadership and ownership of it. It was just really beautiful. I think about high achieving kids too,
Yeah.
um, because often we look at grades. Like I had good grades and I was a wreck as a kid, and
Yes.
that's because for me, education was 100% extrinsic. I did not
Mm.
go to school being like, I want to learn. I went to school to get good grades, to make my mom happy, right? I didn't get in trouble because I never had bad grades growing up or, lower grades growing up. But then as I started to realize that my friends liked how I acted when I was silly or being friendly, it was like 100%. I'm doing this to make people happy. there was
Yeah.
no part of me. I didn't feel excited about my education until I was in grad school. And I spent one night after taking an educational psychology class. I spent a night in the university library just printing out hundreds of articles and just being excited and being like, this confirms this theory I have. Like this is research. There's evidence. And I remember thinking, this is the first time I've ever really felt connected to my education without an extrinsic kind of, fear of, am I messing up, or I don't want to, let people down, or like I have to do good. And it took me till grad school to feel that way. And I got
Yeah.
good grades. And so when I work with kids on how they feel about themselves, some of the most anxious kids that I meet, some of the most depressed kids that I talk with, are sometimes the kids who have good grades. They're the kids who are putting a crazy amount of pressure on themselves. And
Yes.
I've had parents be shocked when I've shared that with them. They're like, I don't care. I love them no matter what. And I'm like, well, that's not what they're telling themselves, right? And so
Yeah.
they're getting good grades, but their good grades are to make other people happy. And I feel like that is a lot of what education has become. It feels very extrinsically motivated. I have to
Yes.
get good grades because that's how I'm valued, or I have to get good grades because I don't want to get a consequence. And
Yes.
I can't blame them. I can't blame them, because how many opportunities do young people have in school to really connect with themselves and to connect to help them understand what this says about who they are, and or what this says about who they could be. I don't know if there's many opportunities for that, but in that class with those kids, they had a chance to be healers. They had a chance
Yeah.
to be a team. They were not all friends, and I told them that's great. Like that's fine. Like
Right.
I don't go to jobs and I'm friends with everybody, but we do have to have a level of respect and care for each other. And I was able
Absolutely.
to see them in that. And we had I'm so sad we went on pandemic for a lot of reasons, but just because we had worked so hard, and I say we as in the kids and me, I gave structure, but they did, I would say, 99% of the work.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers the question.
No, I think it does in so many ways. Couple of thoughts as I was listening. One, my heart is beaming as someone who is a practitioner of and a firm believer in restorative practices for
Mhm.
schools, and the idea that we created space to acknowledge and own the harm and
Mhm.
then make the proper repairs to relationships to create space for wholeness. I think in that example is the encouragement for that cynical teacher, because what the cynical teacher may not know is, or may not be thinking about, is when they kick a kid out, write them up, send them to the office, the kid comes back, they get in an argument with the kid, they write him up, they kick him out, that kid comes back at some other time, maybe they got suspended or whatever, they kick the kid out. Like, all of that is time. So you're
Mhm.
going to spend time somewhere.
Mhm.
The question is the time you're spending going to be towards some level of wholeness, healing, and repair? Or is it going to be towards destruction and disconnection?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you cannot choose to be neutral in that.
Mhm.
There is no neutrality. Like,
Mhm.
our educational system does not allow for neutrality, because if you are silent, then the system continues to work for the dehumanization of everyone involved.
Mhm.
And so I wanted to say that first. Secondly, I wanted to say, like, just, brother, I see you. And I'm so grateful to be in this space sharing around this concept with you, around this idea with you, because even as you were talking about this, the extrinsic motivation, like, that was much of, and it wasn't until grad school that
Mhm.
I really connected with learning. Like, I felt your words helped me feel seen, and thereby seeing you.
Mhm.
Um, I've told this story before, but I'm sure with you. I was one of two black kids in the honors program at the school I
Mhm.
had growing up. And I was in sixth grade. My mom had gone through, which would have been the second divorce that I knew about.
Mhm.
I was really angry, really, really angry. and I had no place to talk about it. So I just performed in school because that's what you do, but it was coming out. Um, and how I handled myself. It's sixth grade too, so it's the beginning of that just awkward phase,
Yeah.
which is where I serve. Right, I'm an admin in middle school, so I see it all the time. Um, but to fast forward the story, I got B's and C's for the majority of that year, and then the fourth market period, buckled down, got A's and B's, and this is back when you could write on the report card, and
Hmm.
the teacher writes that this student does not belong in the gifted and talented program.
Oh.
Still remember her handwriting, remember how it looked, remember how I felt. And those words haunted me for much of my academic career up until grad school, where I actually believed in myself and my capability and was doing it for me because it was motivated by my purpose and my passion and
Mhm.
my identity, right? As an educator, a part of my identity as an educator. Which brings me to this question for us. There's an educator right now listening and is like, yes, I'm with you. We want to create that space. What do I do? How do I do this? What's the beginning stages? So if you could offer some, you know, some help for that educator, what would you say?
I think I when I started sharing my TikToks and stuff, and even like my coaching sessions with kids, you don't see the kind of pre-work that happens. It's like, wow, you just pull these out of kids, and it's like that's not true. And also,
Yeah.
before I share any of those videos, I send them to the kids, I send them to their parents, I send them to the kids again, and I'm like, is there anything in this? Are you sure? And they're like, usually they're like, yeah. And I've had kids be like, no, I don't want to share that. And I'm like, okay, great, it's gone, right? But
Mm,
for me, there's so much importance in just setting up what that space looks like. One of the biggest things that took me a couple of seconds every time I did it was just like articulating what the point of my role was,
hmm.
articulating care. I care about you. I tell the kids I love them. That's because my school was very okay with that. I also know that some people feel weird about that. I don't think
Yeah.
you should ever force someone to say I love you if you don't feel comfortable with it. But
Right.
love is a huge character strength of mine. It's a huge core value, and I was in a place where it was accepted. And but I think care is really important. I care about you. I care about you no matter what is going on. I care about you when you're performing. I care about you when you're learning. I care about you when you're struggling, and just creating that foundation and trying to check in with kids as much as I can whenever there's a chance to let them know that I see them and I appreciate them. And so
Yeah.
because every kid that I love, all my kids in the back from the years of working with kids,
Yeah.
they had struggles, they made mistakes, they messed up, they caused harm to other people. And when I had to have tough conversations with them, especially the kids that I taught at that school for 3 years, they knew that it might be a tough conversation, but it was grounded in care. And
Yeah.
they knew for me specifically, it was grounded in love. I even asked the kids one time, what are the points of grade? Like, what is the point of grades? And kids could not tell me. Their answers
Mm,
were all over the place. And very few kids were like, it measures where you're at. And that's when we talked about it, I was like, that's the point of grades. But because of the anxiety and the pressure that gets attached to
yes.
grades, right? Like we start to devalue ourselves when in reality, it's supposed to be a measure of where you're at. And
Right.
instead, it becomes like a safety thing. So just telling kids, you know, what kind of reframing learning for them is really important to me. I
Yes.
also talk a lot about performing or showing uh, when kids are starting to show that they get the knowledge, that that's okay, but that the kids who are not ready to show, it's okay for them too. They're still in the learning
Mm,
phase. That helped kids a lot to take chances and to kind of put themselves out there, because a lot of kids felt like they'd have to be right. We'd be starting a new unit. And I'm like, what do you all think about this word? And kids would be terrified to answer because they didn't want to be wrong. And so
mm,
just being like, hey, this is a new unit. Like, I'm just introducing it to you. Like, it's okay for you to not have the answers. If you had the answers, you would not need to be in school. So you don't need to
right.
perform
Yes.
to know that I care. Right. And so I think I'm a communicator. Communication is really important to me. Uh, but just sharing care, letting them know that this is a place where no matter how you are or what's going on in your life, I care about you and that I'm here. And I had, just so many kids come and talk to me and feel open. And I had to have really tough conversations with kids about schoolwork, which I hated because, bro, I don't want to talk to kids about not getting their work done, but I have to because I
Yep.
care about them and I want them to meet, the expectations that we're setting. And I think that was just really important. All the kids I've worked with, the people who are young adults now who are sharing their lives with me and sharing engagement, pictures and sharing kids, which is crazy to me, uh, know that our relationship was grounded and you care about us. I even went to a school recently in California, and that's one of the biggest pieces of feedback that kids gave me is we felt like you cared about us.
Hmm.
And I think it's important to articulate that because kids are often they're telling themselves stories that are not true, and like we were talking about earlier, it's like not on them to unpack that in their heads,
Yeah.
right? It's like what we are doing, they don't have access to this. Some of the kids might have it, some kids might have teachers who talk to them, but for the most part they're just kind of going along just like we did, right? Like
Yeah.
this is how I show up, this is how I get, you know safety, this is how I feel valued. Another big one, and this is something that a lot of people have pushed back on, and that's why it's an offer, like leave
Yeah.
it or take it.
Yeah.
Gratitude has been
Mm.
huge for me. Gratitude has built so many relationships with me and my students, especially when I can tell you got those kids who are a little bit out of pocket, right? I love those kids and
Hmm.
they can be powerful forces in the class.
Yeah.
And so instead of even just pulling them aside and saying, you're a leader, you need to do better or blah, 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 just being like, I appreciate your humor. Like we can work on it, we can work on the timing, but I really appreciate what your humor brings to class. And
Yeah.
knowing that it's appreciated, I would see kids start to use it more um, in a positive way.
Positive way. Yeah.
Writing gratitude sticky notes to kids. If I can find something I'm grateful for, uh, I think that that's a deeper way of seeing kids. I also
Yes.
was at a school one time where they were like, let's get to know the kids. And I was like, yes, this is my thing. I could tell you all about the kids. I know all
Yeah.
about them. And I was super stoked. And it was like, the assignment was learn 3 facts about them. And I told them, I was like, look, you can know something about someone and not see them. Like you can know that this person plays soccer. You can know that they like video games. You can know that they have a younger
It's so good.
sister, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that you see them. But gratitude really says, I see how you are showing up and I appreciate it. And so if there is a way, I understand how much is put on teachers. It's one of the reasons I had to leave the classroom is because it kind of conflicted with what I was trying to teach.
Yeah.
If there's a way to show kids that you care and to show them that you see them, when they're struggling, they will be more receptive to you. And to understand also that when kids push back, they're not just pushing back against you, they're pushing back against society, they're pushing back against administrators, they're pushing back against parents and friends, that oftentimes the hardest behaviors are like like the toughest defense mechanisms to get through. And so I've
Yes.
had kids just yelling at me in my face and I'm like, I care about you. I don't like how you're acting right now, but I get it and I care about you. And then to see them come back 2 days later and just be there and to see that the care hasn't changed. Um,
Yes.
I made a mistake with my seventh grade math teacher. I've talked about her a couple times. I really liked her. She seemed stressed out all the time. Like I
Mm.
always felt bad for her because she just seemed so stressed.
Yeah.
And we were doing a project. We had to make a quilt, and I misspelled a word on my quilt, but I was so proud of it. And she flipped out on me. She'd told me to stop talking in class before, but I was like, I get it. She was kind with me with my math. She was really positive. But that one time when she told me that I'd ruined it and that how could I make a mistake like that, I just
Mm.
never bounced back with her from then. And I completely checked out in that class every time I came in there because I was so embarrassed that I let this teacher who I liked down. And she was probably having a tough day and she probably
Hmm.
had a lot of stuff going on. But if she would have came and just said, I'm sorry, like it would have helped me to restore
Yes.
that. But there was no restoration. And so for the rest of for the rest of my career or my educational career in math, I had a lot of anxiety of don't mess up, right? And
Yeah.
pushing away from math and pushing away from math teachers because I was so hurt in that little interaction that we had.
Yeah. As I was listening to you, for educators listening, I hear, and feel free to fill anything I might be missing. I hear first, um, that a lot of what we do can run amok if we have uncommunicated expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we assume that our way of handling things, the way that we are, a student could come in, for example, I'm in middle school, so seventh grade, they should know this by now. But why are we assuming
Mm-hmm.
that they know, that they have the same understanding? And why are we assuming that their understanding aligns with what the expectation is?
Mm.
Right? So there's that. Two, creating space for care, creating space for belonging. The how in that would be what you talked about with practicing gratitude. I think educators need to practice that first and foremost with themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
100%.
what are you thankful for? And yeah, obviously, I know, like, this is all the stuff that you talk about, and I'm grateful for the ways you share so bravely and wisely in this space, because we have so many educators that have, we are trained to have a PhD in our understanding of everyone else, but yet don't have a bachelor's in our understanding of self.
Yep. Yep.
Um, and so to create that space where kids can ask questions, be curious, for us to be curious when we see these behaviors,
Mm-hmm.
when there is disrespect, right? I've said this before and I wrote about it, but like if a kid goes to a doctor and complaining about a stomach ache and they throw up, the doctor doesn't say you need more discipline. The
Mm-hmm.
doctor gets curious because he expects sick kids to come to him. In the same way, kids are going to emotionally throw up. They're going to show you different pieces of who they are. And sometimes that doesn't necessarily connect with where we are.
Yeah.
But if we would just get curious enough to ask better questions
Yeah.
rather than rushing immediately to punitive discipline and all the other toxic behaviors we have in school, I, I wonder what would be different. You
Yeah.
know, I wonder what would be changed.
I I also think I think we need to start thinking about kids' relationship with learning and what learning
Yes.
means to them. I This is like maybe an unpopular opinion, but I don't like having a good relationship with the kids in my class did not mean that they loved my class or like the subject that they were learning. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like having care didn't suddenly activate this thing in them that they're like, now I'm the perfect student. But I saw them being influenced by the way that they felt in that class. And I saw them taking chances and taking risks. And I saw them communicating in really powerful ways. And so even if they don't go on to study science or go on to do something with math or to do something with history, they are going to remember how they felt in that class. I ask my kids a lot, like, what was your favorite thing you learned in my class? And they tell me like the wildest stuff that I know for a fact I never taught them. And it was not because I was like, yeah, what? They're like, you told me to stand up for myself. You told me to never take somebody else's bubble. You told me to be kind to yourself. And I'm thinking about my curriculum. And I was like, that was never the curriculum, but it was the way that they felt and the way that they saw me as the person that they cared about or the person that was teaching them, how I treated them, how I treated other people, when I apologized for things, when I would own up, when I would ask questions when I was unsure. Those were the spaces that I really started to see kids come out of their shell. And then they would have aha moments. But I think that I have parents reach out all the time and say, I just want you to get them to like school. And I'm like, no. I didn't really like school, so I'm not going to try to force your kid to like school, but we can talk about their relationship with learning, right?
Yeah.
What does learning mean to you? Learning should not be about safety. Learning should be about expansion and growth. And if we want kids to grow, there's so much opportunity in the way that we can show them compassion and kindness and
Mm.
influence them versus manipulate them. And
Yes.
and that's why I had to, I did the work I did with the kids. I I am always shocked to hear what kids have taken away from my class, but
Mm.
I'm always happy to hear what they've taken away because it's what they needed at that time. Um,
Mm.
yeah, I think I just think Yeah. I don't want to get too deep into it, but we just need to help kids with their humanity more. We need to help kids to be nicer to themselves because I see so much hate and I see so much anger, and
Yeah,
so much of that is coming from a place of a lack of feeling safe, whether they're threatened by new things, whether it's fixed mindset, right? There's so much lack of compassion and humanity. But I think that that compassion and humanity kind of lives in the thriving space. And when you're just trying to survive, it's very difficult to ask people to achieve those things. So I didn't see my kids thrive in my class until they felt like, okay, I'm not just surviving here, right? I'm safe. Like this is a
yeah,
good place for me to be. And then I can start to take chances. Then I can start to put myself out there more. I can start to do these things that really help me expand as a person versus really fitting into those boxes. Like I said, if I would have had a program when I was younger, the first time I did a leadership program, I was like, what is this? Why did I not know about this? Why was I never involved in this? But if I
yeah,
would have had some space to just talk about how I felt as a young person, how much that could have helped me expand earlier versus shrinking my inner self and really building up an artificial outer selves, which I just see kids and adults do so much. So right now, I think this work is more important than ever. If I was a
yeah,
kid and I was watching social media or the news, I would be so distraught all
yeah.
the time with how the adults are acting. And then these same adults who turn around and then try to force kids to be nice to each other and to be kind and to listen. Like we need to check our expectations for ourselves as adults. Like we need to have an agreement making session with the adults in this country because that's what they're watching. That's
Absolutely.
what they're watching. They think that we think that they're being swayed by all these different subjects and blah blah blah, but in reality they are watching how we are treating each other. They are watching the division and the anger and the lack of compassion that is happening, and then they're gonna that's what they're gonna grow into, right? So that's why I do my work. I mean, full circle, going back to what we said, that's my why, is because we can't succeed as humans if
Yeah,
we're all moving from a place of fear, and we need to be moving from a place of humanity. But that means that we have to challenge the systems that kind of just keep us in the survival status versus the thriving status, especially for black and brown kids, especially for black and
yes,
brown boys, especially for LGBTQ kids. Like
yes.
the people who are already up against so many ideas of who they're supposed to be, they need that space and that care and that love the most.
Um, I want to do two things as we round out our time. First, brother, I want to thank you um, for this time and for this space. I There are moments since I've been doing this where you bring people on and you interview them and you talk and it's great and there's a great connection. You kind of move on, but there are other times where it's like almost therapeutic for you. And this is one of those moments. So I want to thank you for how you show up. Every time I've seen you, you have been consistently you, and I appreciate that. It's refreshing in the world that we live in. So I just want to thank you and encourage you to keep fighting this fight. We need you out here, and the work that you do.
Can
Um,
I just hold a mirror up to you? I'm serious. I'm serious. And I want to say to you too, how validating it feels, right? I think that we focus on individualistic kind of ideas and a lot
yeah,
of it's this one person, and the best, I've said this 1,000 times, but the best thing that has come from me getting to share my work on larger platforms was connecting with people who are doing the work, to just
mm,
know that it's not just me, that it's the work, right?
yes,
And that
yes,
takes some of that pressure off, but also it's just nice to know people speak your language and people get it, right?
yeah,
I had somebody say to me at a party, who cares about how kids feel? And I literally had to remind myself that I could catch an assault charge for punching someone.
yes,
Because I was like, oh, but I was like, no, he doesn't get it. He doesn't get it. And I'm not going to
yeah.
get mad at him about that. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity to talk with you and the community that you've cultivated. And I appreciate so much, especially growing up as someone who didn't feel black enough, who didn't have a
Mm,
lot of black friends, who was told that I'm not a real educator. Like having moments like these with people like you, it really feeds my soul.
mm. So Donovan, how could people get in touch with you, brother? Support your work and yeah, just get in touch with the awesomeness that is you.
So I don't market this enough, but I totally should. I am a
Yes.
mental health youth speaker through Active Minds. I'll send you that link as well. I do go to schools as my own individual entity, and I have been doing this program where I go for a week to middle schools and I just spend time with the kids before I do my speech, and it's been so fantastic. And I've just recently got some funding for it, so I'm looking for some schools. Also, Dono friend is what the kids call me because I don't like them calling me Mr. Donovan if I'm not really their teacher. Dono friend is just like a little trendy thing. But if you look up Dono friend, DONOFRIEND, it's just me. Like if you type Donovan friend into Google, all of my stuff will come up.
Yeah.
My website, DonovanTaylorHall.com, has consultation times if you're interested in coaching, if you're interested in youth development, speeches. I also do PDs for teachers and parents. But yeah, I think reach out and start a conversation. I'm very open to kind of explore and see what we're doing. And I've got some really great things coming up that I'm super excited to share about. But until then, yeah, I think the best ways that you can support the work is just sharing it with people who you think it would resonate with.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Donovan. And for our listeners, please connect with this brother. He's doing amazing work that education sorely needs at this time. So thank you, brother.
Thank you. Appreciate you.